나무묘호랭개교 나무묘호랭개교 나무묘호랭개교. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in and chanting the Lotus Sutra together with me. So now I would like to talk about a little bit of the traditions of Nichiren Shū. I'm going to put this down a little further. There you go. So I can sit down here and speak to you a little bit more comfortably. Okay, there we go. So, we recited the Lotus Sutra today. We recited the Hoben chapter, the Jigage portion of the Juryo chapter, and also a portion of the Jinzuki chapter. So chapters 2, 16, and 21. All right? And then after that, we chanted the Odaimoku, and then we recited what is called Hōtōge. Okay? And I will reread that in English, the translation of it, in just a moment. So there is a tradition behind Hōtōge, and I'm going to chant it for you now one more time, so that you can listen to it. It has normally when we chant the sutra, it is one character, one beat. So if I was to chant this portion of the Lotus Sutra, because this is actually comes from the Lotus Sutra Hotoge, I would normally chant it when I'm doing the sutra recitation part. I would normally say, Shikyo nanji nyaku sanji shaga soku kangi Sho Butsu yaku ne nyoze shini Sho Butsu shotan, etc. Okay, so it'd be one beat, very rhythmic, one beat for each character, like that. All right. However, in this case of Hōtōge, when we recite it right after chanting no Daimoku, we have a very particular rhythm, almost a little bit maybe jazzy, if you would like to call it that. Okay, and it's a the beat is very irregular and different than the normal way of chanting the sutra, and it goes like this. Shikyo nanji nyaku sanji shaga soku kangi Sho Butsu yaku nen nyoze shini Sho Butsu shotan Zei soku yu myo zei soku shojin zei myo jikai myo sunda sha soku ishi toge mujo butsu do nobo rai se doku jishikyo Zei shinbui shi ju ju zen jin Butsu metsu dogo no ge go gi Zei shoten ni seken shi gen oku isse No shu yu setsu issai ten nin Kai yo kuyo. So it's a very special rhythm. And there's a little bit of history behind this, why we chant it that way. So I'm going to today talk a little bit about that history and tradition. And as you know, Nichiren Shū is very, very dedicated to the Lotus Sutra and to the spirit and heart of the Lotus Sutra. We follow basically two masters, that is Buddha Shakyamuni and Nichiren Daishoni, as our main teachers and masters of Buddhism. We also follow the teachings of Tiantai. It is said that when you read a liturgy of a religion, you can really start to understand what that religion is all about. So they might teach you some philosophy or different principles, but when you delve into the liturgy itself, you can really see the heart, the pure heart of what that religion stands for and what it's all about. So this particular portion of the Lotus Sutra, which is chanted after we chant the Odaimoku, comes from a particular time in the life of Nichiren Daishoni. In fact, in our liturgy, we recite the Lotus Sutra, which talks about the eternal life and the eternal enlightenment of the Buddha Shakyamuni, but also we remember and recall the life of Nichiren Daishoni within our liturgy itself. And that is done by our daily, first of all, by our daily reading of his words, which we read in his original words in Japanese, and in actually Kamakura era Japanese, archaic, medieval Japanese actually, and then also followed by, in this case, followed by our English translation. Or in other countries, for other languages are translated in, for example, Italian or French or Spanish or Chinese or what have you, all right? So that people can understand very well what Nichiren Daishoni is trying to convey to us. So these teachings are always included in our, a portion of the teachings are always included in our daily recitation of the Nichiren Shū liturgy. Now, after we've chanted this, we chant the Odaimoku. And then after the Odaimoku, we close the Odaimoku. Before offering our personal prayers, we chant the Hōtōge, the portion I just chanted for you. Okay, so now, as I mentioned just a second ago, this is tied with a tradition, a part of the history of Nichiren Daishoni. So I would like to talk now a little bit about that history. So Nichiren first arrived in Kamakura in about 1254. And between 1254 and 1260, a lot of the population in Kamakura perished due to a succession of many tragic calamities and problems that included drought and earthquakes, epidemics like we are experiencing now, famine and fires and storms. The society was very fragile at this point, and Nichiren saw so much suffering everywhere. So he returned. He wanted to find a reason for all of these sufferings and see if he could find solutions, just like the Buddha did when he first started his pursuit of the teachings of the Dharma. And Nichiren, so he went to read all of the Buddha's teachings to see if he could find answers, why this was occurring and what could be done. And he started to realize that the society had become had fallen apart due a lot to the corruptness of the government, but also to the way the people were observing Buddhism. And they felt that because it was so central in the people's lives, that since this had become corrupt or non-complacent or etc., it was having an effect on the lives of the people too. And as a result, even going as far as even that the environment around also seemed to mirror this type of falling apart. And so Nichiren Daishoni wanted to correct that because Japan had been a country primarily dedicated to the Lotus Sutra. But in these years, when Nichiren was starting his teachings, he realized that the Lotus Sutra had fallen to the wayside. And people were spending a lot of time devoting to other sutras other than the Lotus Sutra, and they even turned their back on Shakyamuni Buddha. And more attention was spent in the government control, and some of the schools were even connected to this government control. Some of their temples in Kamakura operated as extensions of the actual government to put a lot of their policies into place. And so they were recompensed for all of their effort. The temples became much more rich. They were able to build up their temples more in a much more beautiful manner. Which is fine, but the problem that happened here was that they didn't use this money to help the people. They used it only to really increase the wealth and prestige and maybe authority of the temple without worrying about the people. Now, Buddhism is, of course, we have a lot of beautiful traditions and beautiful temples, but the departure point is where everything starts, is that it's a philosophy to help people to overcome suffering and to find stability and tranquility in their lives and start to enjoy life. And if we don't have that, then even with all the beauties of our temples and traditions, then it is meaningless. And this is what Nichiren had come to a conclusion. And he wanted to be able to try to reason with different officials in the government and also with different Buddhist masters and teachers and other monks, so that they could change the direction and bring Buddhism back to its pure form, especially in its spirit and approach. And also, of course, return Shakyamuni to the centralmost figure of reference, along with the Lotus Sūtra, as it had always done. So, in 1260, he began to write a paper, and he presented it to the government with his ideas on how the country could be, all these sufferings and calamities could be alleviated, and the country could return to becoming peaceful and to actually secure this peace and tranquility and make the country a more stable place. And he presented his ideas in a question and answer format between a traveler and his, who's asking a host who's hosting him, asking him different questions and things like that. So in this format, he formulated his ideas and he presented it to the government. Now this writing was called the Risho Ankokuron, or on securing the peace of the land through the establishment first of the proper teachings of the Dharma. And that was dated on the 16th of July of 1260. And he presented it to the government, but the government ignored him. They gave him no official response. That was upfront. Behind the scenes, it was a little bit different. And because some of the Buddhist teachers and leaders, the monks, had seen this text, and in this text, Nichiren was also critical of the status quo, of how Buddhism was being taught and propagated in society, and how it had kind of steered off course. And Nichiren was also critical to some of the founding teachers of these new tendencies in Buddhism that, according to him, it really drove Buddhism off course. So this infuriated a lot of the Buddhist clergy of Kamakura, and also many government leaders. So a month later, in August of 1260, then a group of Buddhist leaders from the Pure Land school attacked the Nichiren Daishoni's dwelling. He lived in a small little hut on a hillside, just outside the center of Kamakura, in an area called Nagoe. And they attacked his hermitage, his little hut, and they tried to burn it down with him in it, so they could burn him alive, kill him. And so they made this first attempt on his life to silence him. And so that was basically the response of the government, was to try to silence him by doing away with him. And anyway, he was able to escape this scene. They burned the residence down completely, and he escaped and then moved on he went back to the home area where he grew up, in what is now today Chiba Prefecture, in an area called Shimosa Province, just north of where he was raised. And he stayed in the home of one of his loyal lay believers, who later became a monk himself. His name was Toki Jonin. Okay, so this persecution we're just talking about, where they tried to burn him, they burned down his residence and tried to burn him alive inside the house, was called the Matsubayatsu Persecution. So this area which we talked about of Nagoe, there's another name for the area which is called Matsubalayatsu. So this is called the persecution of Matsubalayatsu. Anyway, let's go back now to his return to Chiba and the home of Toki Jonin. So he stayed there, but then in the spring of the following year, 1261, he decided things had cooled down again, and he would return to Kamakura, to the capital, and resume his propagation efforts. So then he built another hut in the same Matsubayatsu area, but in a different, not in the exact same place, on one of the hills there, and he began his missionary efforts to try to teach the Lotus Sutra and bring everyone back to faith in the kind of the pure Tendai or pure Lotus Sutra school teachings that the country had originally attended. And he put a lot of effort into this. And he also taught the people to chant Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So the government officials and some of these original religious leaders who had been essential in instigating this first persecution heard that he had returned to Kamakura, and so they decided they would take action again because they really wanted to silence him. And so they decided then on May 12th to exile him. So Nichiren Daishonin was arrested and taken to the beach of Kamakura, where a boat was awaiting, to then take him to a place called Izu, which is on the peninsula. I mean, it's in the Kanagawa prefecture where Kamakura is, but it's quite a ways away. And this area was a Pure Land threshold. The whole area was very devoted to Pure Land Buddhism, to whom Nichiren had been critical in the Rishan Kokuron. So they sent him there in exile, and this exile lasted for about 2 years. Okay, so it started from the 12th of May, 1261, until the 22nd of February, 1263. Now, when he was arrested, this was the first time Nichiren Daishonin had been arrested. So, of course, it startled and shocked all of the believers and the disciples of Nichiren Daishonin. They arrested him, they took him down to this place where the boat would depart, and all of the disciples and the members followed him because to see him off, and also out of sadness and shock. So as they were chanting, one of the disciples, one of the monks, and disciples of Nichiren Daishonin called Nichiro Shonin. He wanted to get on the boat and follow his master because they were afraid to leave Nichiren Daishonin in the hands of these people, seeing that they had already tried to kill him and tried to burn him alive. Who knows what would have happened? So Nichiro decided he wanted to go with Nichiren Daishonin in exile so that he could take care of him, look after him, make sure that he would be safe. And so they put Nichiren on the boat, and Nichiro then tried to wade in the water to get on the boat himself too, so that he could accompany Nichiren Daishonin. And the soldiers weren't going to have it. And so they tried to get him to back off, but Nichiro was insistent. He really wanted to go, and he really wanted to be there to help and protect Nichiren Daishonin. And he tried again to approach the boat, and this time the soldiers took the oars of the boat that they had, and they started to beat him to get him to get off the boat and let go of the boat. And in the process, they broke his shoulder. His shoulder. And if everyone has ever had a broken shoulder, which I did many years ago, it is a very, very painful experience. It's not just a little whack in the head or something like this. It's a very excruciating pain when this bone breaks, and it takes more than a month for it to heal. And in fact, in my case, it took 2 to 3 months, and the pain continued all that time. So this is what happened to Nichiro. He had this. They took the oar and they broke his bones here, and so because of that, he had to let go of the boat. All right, and then the boat started to drift away. But at that time, when the soldiers were beating him, Nichiren Daishonin looked down and noticed that a number of soldiers had their hands ready to draw their swords. So he realized that Nichiro's life was in danger. In those days, we're not talking about that they had a lot of respect for all of life. We're talking about a society that had been put into upheaval, and everything was ruled by the military. In other words, everything was ruled by the sword. Soldiers would not hesitate to kill anyone. All right? And in order to keep the status quo, and including a monk. So Nichiren saw they also had their hands on their swords, and so he decided to yell at Nichiro in order to protect him, so the soldiers would not hurt him. So Nichiren scolded him, and Nichiro was more surprised by the scolding of Nichiren Daishonin than being hit by the oar. And so that is why he looked up in surprise and shock and bewilderment, and he ended up releasing his hands from the side of the boat. And he just stood there, surprised. But why are you scolding me? I'm trying just to be a good disciple, follow you, my master, and take care of you. And Nichiren Daishonin, of course, felt great appreciation towards Nichiro for his effort and for what he was trying to do. But as I just mentioned, he was also trying to save Nichiro's life. So Nichiren Shonin chanted this portion of the Kenhōtō-hon, which is chapter 11 of the Lotus Sūtra, Beholding the Treasure Tower. He recited this portion to Nichiro. Okay, so since the boat was already moving, he couldn't chant normal way. but the boat was going up and down, and moving around. Sometimes he was standing up while he was chanting. And so he lost his balance a little bit, it would be unsteady. So because of that affected the way he was chanting. And so from this movement and unsteadiness of the boat, standing on the boat while he was chanting, is what influenced his voice. And so he was not able to chant it Shi-kyo nan-ji, nyaku zan-ji, sha, one beat, proper one beat. But it was all like this. Shi-kyo nan-ji, nyaku zan-ji, sha, ga soku, kangi. He was losing his balance also as he was standing up to recite it. So this is the tradition behind why we chant the Hōtōge in this manner. It is all linked with this episode in the history of Nichiren Daishoni's life and his love and appreciation for his disciple Nichiro and all his disciples and lay believers. So I would like now to read the translation of what this portion is that we read after chanting Do Daimoku. And this shows you Nichiren Daishoni's great heart of appreciation by choosing to read this particular portion to Nichiro at this time. It is difficult to keep this sutra. I shall be glad to see anyone keeping it even for a moment. So will all the other Buddhas. Such a person will be praised by all the Buddhas as a person of valor, one of endeavor, and one who should be considered to have already observed the precepts and practiced the dutta. Such a person will quickly attain the unsurpassed and perfect enlightenment of the Buddha. Anyone who reads and recites this sutra in the future is a true child of mine, and shall be considered to live on the stage of purity and good. After my extinction, anyone who is able to understand the meaning of this sutra will become the eyes for all heavenly and earthly beings in this world. Anyone who expounds this sutra, even for a moment in this dreadful world, should be honored with offerings from all heavenly and earthly beings. So this shows you the great feelings of the heart of Nichiren Daishoni that he had towards his disciple. And so this has become a great tradition of Nichiren Shū, and we recite it every day. All right? And that is it. That is the tradition behind Hōtōge. So a part of the history of Nichiren Daishoni's life, also enveloped within the liturgy, daily liturgy and observance of the Lotus Sūtra practice every day. Okay? Based on the life of Nichiren, Bodhisattva Jogyo, and also his disciples. Okay? So that in that respect, it also is an encouragement to all of us, in the same way as Nichiren was encouraging Nichiro Shonin, as Nichiren was being taken off to, who knows what would have happened to him. He didn't know himself. So he was being taken off into exile. Even though there was such great uncertainty, and he knew his life was in great danger, his compassion was to be able to protect his disciple and show appreciation to his disciple. And that shows really who the person of Nichiren Daishoni really was. Okay, so we will speak about this exile to Izu maybe in another time in more detail about what happened afterwards. But this was the opening episode of his being arrested for the first time and sent into the first of what would later be two exiles. He was first exiled to Izu, and then years later, once again, but to Sado Island. So on another occasion, we will speak about these times. But with that, I'd like to now say thank you very much for your attention and having practiced with me, and also having studied and reflected on the traditions and the teachings of the Dharma. Right? Thank you so much, and I wish you all a very good Friday, and we will see you for our next appointment, which the ceremony will be in Italian though this time, on Sunday morning, okay? Through my page on Facebook. All right? Thank you so much. Good day to you. Let's chant the Daimoku 3 times. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you. Have a great day. All right? Wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.